Welcome to Vampire Divorce with attorney Clarke Young.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Vampire Divorce with attorney Clarke Young. Clarke is a seasoned family law attorney, consultant, and expert witness who helps courts and families navigate the realities of high-conflict custody cases. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today we're talking about what tends to happen in borderline custody cases when control begins to slip and how these cases evolve as earlier strategies stop working. Clarke, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Let's get into it. In borderline custody cases, what signals that the case is entering a later stage where earlier strategies are no longer working? Are there things to look out for or telltale signs?
Well, the real issue in these cases is that you can't start the case with the garden variety approach, and it's a very difficult starting point because when everything is set up in the court system to force you down one road, and your case doesn't belong on that road, it takes a long time to get to the point where the court understands that you should be on a different Autobahn. And so when that happens, when you finally get to that juncture, that point, the case really does take on a whole different flavor, a whole different dynamic, and the court suddenly has to become more responsive and more attentive and more interested in actually solving the problem that is driving the entire conflict. Because up to that point, they've been avoiding the real problem, and they've been just trying to put Band-Aids on hemorrhaging wounds, so to speak.
Got it. So speak to why the loss of control tends to trigger escalation rather than resolution.
Well, yeah, the whole issue of control is just fundamental to any borderline case because at that psychological level, you're talking about someone who has been basically wired from birth to relate to the world and problem solving from the point of view that um, the world is scarce. Your needs will not be fulfilled. You have to learn how to um, manipulate the world, control the world, deceive the world into giving you what you need.
Yeah.
And that once that pattern is imprinted in an infant's and a child's psychology, that's going to be the place from which all of the relationships they have in their lives uh, spawn, if you will. And that's also they're going to be the seeds of the destruction of every relationship they're in. Relationships just can't survive when they're just power, control, deceit, and manipulation based. And when you, as the other partner to the borderline, are only there to serve their needs, you're an accessory, and their whole game is to subjugate you to the will so you can provide them with whatever they need in the moment. So when you're proceeding on that kind of a agenda, you're not going to have very great success in the court system with a non-borderline client, with a normal range parent, because the other side is going to be always into a how do I destroy you mode, and you're into a conflict resolution, how do I save the children mode.
Mm.
And it's just a clash of universes. You have to, as I said, you have to get to the point where the judge sees that that is actually what's happening, that there's a collision of worldviews and psychology. And until that happens, they really aren't going to be willing, ready, or able to deal with the conflict.
I see. Yeah, I was thinking too about it's not a direct. Maybe it's a cousin of, but we've dealt with people where you know like a zero-sum game, right? Like this idea that if, I have to win or if someone else wins, I lose. And that's not always, it's not a binary situation, oftentimes.
No,
So,
you're exactly right, because
yeah.
from the borderline's point of view, say you're doing property division or the children or anything, what is theirs, and what is part of the community is theirs, and what uh, is the other party's is theirs. They have this incredible, insatiable appetite. I mean, the greed is unbelievable, but the entitlement means that they're supposed to have everything. And they believe they're entitled to have everything. So again, how are you supposed to resolve or settle any issue when they know they're entitled to everything? Just, I mean, they just know it.
Well, let's talk tactics for a moment. How do tactics tend to change? Once accusations, pressure, procedural strategies stop producing results, like once that temperature gets turned up, what do you do?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, but in the sense that earlier in the case, you're consistently the normal range parent is trying to consistently hold the ground that they have,
Mhm.
and they plant their flag on that hill, and they're basically saying from day one to the end of the case, this is who I am, this is what I'm up to, and this is what up against. So their tactics are going to, in some sense, be the same. The strategy is going to be the same beginning to end. The real interesting part, the real secret sauce in what I do and other people who do what I do, which are very few,
Mhm.
uh, you have to be able to also at the same time be a moving target. Because if you play the same cards all the time, the borderlines learn. They're very bright. They're going to learn very quickly, and they're going to figure out how to outflank you. So you have to be a moving target for what's going on outside of the courtroom. But in terms of the judge, you have to be totally consistent so the judge sees that you are a stable, consistent human being. But that is your normal range self showing up and presenting that portrait to the court. But when you're dealing with the borderline, you can be anything but yourself. You have to be all kinds of different things because the communication and the outside of the courtroom strategy has to be flexible enough so that you can play this 3D chess game with a borderline and checkmate them outside of court. And that's where it gets really dicey. So regardless of what point you are in the case, and I generally divide the cases into the time period before the judge wakes up and then the time period after the judge wakes up. So once the judge wakes up, the case in another sense, this is why I didn't know what question you're really asking me, because in another sense, once the judge wakes up, the case gets more honest, if you will.
Mm.
What's happening inside and outside the courtroom are going to be the same on the normal range parents side of the case. And at that point, you've already exposed the borderline, you've taken off their mask, you've helped the judge understand that they're really not capable, psychologically speaking, of being reasonably adequate parents. They're just not. And so that's kind of how you have to deal with the tactics before and after um, the light goes on for the court.
Yeah, that's interesting from like you said, you're consistent in the court, and then, outside of the court early on, you're having to, bob and weave in order to, you know, deal with the unreasonable person. But there is a point where you expose them for what they are, and that, like, it's interesting, the judge wakes up, you said, where it's you can't go in direct and say, "Hey, judge, this person is, a crazy person." You have to demonstrate through the procedures and tactics that the judge comes to that realization, uh, on their own almost.
Well, this is a great point you've raised. Um, if you put in your initial pleadings, Your Honor, I'm dealing with a borderline, opposing counsel will object to that in pleadings, in court, whatever. Oh, well, the other party's not an expert. This person hasn't been evaluated. They don't know what they're talking about. And you get a lot of grief for that. On the other hand, if you don't tell the court up front what the case is really like, then you face the very real possibility that happens in real life where the judge later says, well, why didn't you say this at the beginning of the case? You're changing the theory of your case. So the question becomes, how do you thread that needle? And the answer is, well, you go to the DSM-5, you look at all the criteria for establishing borderline personality disorder, and you describe the behaviors in real life that comport with each of the elements, each of the criteria for establishing borderline personality disorder, but you don't use that word. And so it's a silly game, but you're basically just describing to the court, here's this aberrant non-parental behavior, this anti-parent behavior that's occurring, and I'm trying to save my kid. So in a way, you do have to say on day one exactly what's going on. And I call this, in my practice, a day in the life declaration. It doesn't matter if it's a domestic violence motion that gets filed first, or if it's a custody proceeding first, or whatever. But that first declaration that you submit to the court is going to be the touchstone that you come back to every time you walk into court and you say, Your Honor, I know you have 200 cases on your docket, you have to, that you're handling. But I want you to remember day one when I came in and I filed that declaration, that day in the life declaration where I described the relationship, how the borderline relates to me dysfunctionally, violently, manipulatively, all the horrible behaviors, all the abuse I've absorbed. Same thing, second part, same thing with the children. This is how they relate to the children, and it's not healthy. This is what is going to happen in the future if you don't do anything about this. And this is the solution I propose. And you have to have these different elements in there at day one. And after about a year and a half, the judge finally goes back and reads that again. And I've had judges basically say, um, when you first came in, I didn't believe a word. I thought you were just being histrionic or upset or angry or the unfriendly parent. That's what they usually say. But now I realize you were being descriptive. So that's
Yep.
one of those aha moments, right? When the judge gets it. And then, but going back to your question, that first declaration is a touchstone. I mean, it has to be done right. You got to take your time. You got to marshal all your evidence. You got to back it all up. And at the end of the day, what you're really doing is you're not giving the judge a choice. That's
Yeah.
how you win these cases.
Understood. Yeah, there's a certain there are the dots, connect them. You lay it out. And you hinted this, but I'm curious. I know that these cases can become extremely expensive. What drives the cost over time? Although time itself is one of.
Well, there's a short answer and there's a long answer. The short answer is the borderlines, misrepresentations of reality, there are misrepresentations of fact, they're deceit, they're manipulations. Um, it's axiomatic practically that, it doesn't cost anything to tell a lie. It doesn't cost anything to make something up, but it costs 10 to 100 times that, times zero, but whatever. It costs a lot of money to prove that the other person is telling a lie, and not just in isolation, but there's a pattern. So what you end up doing and why these cases are so expensive is that you can go through one declaration that a borderline is filed, and you'll find 10 or 15 things that just never happened. They just made them up. Or most likely, they're a projection of the of what they do. I call a confession projection. They they take the things that they've done, the horrible things they've done, and they project it onto the other party, and then they write a declaration as if the other party did what they did. And this is like in every case. I mean, the amazing part about this is that once you understand the borderline mystique, you understand that they're all cut from the same whole cloth. They're just exactly the same, and the variations in how they behave is minuscule. So the good news from the court's point of view is once you have done one of these cases successfully, you can do them all the time, because you're going to see the same pathology play out in the exact same way every time.
Yeah, that's interesting how, I mean, just your depth of experience in these situations and your ability to uh uh identify what's going on. I mean, of course, every case is unique, but at the same time, like you said, the patterns of behavior, the underlying cause, I'm sure you're like, oh, here we go again. I've seen this before. I would think too, judges, do you find like judges similarly, I would think would pick up on that? Like, oh, I've seen this kind of a case before. I'm
Yeah. And if what happens is that, well, here the reality is that probably close to 15, maybe as high as 20% of all the cases that these judges are hearing are borderline cases.
mm,
But they're consuming probably 40 to 50% of the court's resources. So the courts, until a particular court realizes that this is what's happening and you have to handle these cases differently, they're going to continue to waste limited judicial resources trying to treat these cases like they're horses when they're really cows. I mean, it's just like they're just different animals altogether. So um, you end up having the situation where uh, judges for whom the light has not gone on yet, they keep kicking the can down the road. And going back to your prior question, that really runs up the expenses. I mean, judges just won't deal with it, and they keep kicking the can down the road, and so nothing ever gets addressed or resolved, and then you're up to hundreds of thousands of dollars on a case that really, the courts are largely responsible for the fact that the cases cost this much. It's really not right.
yeah, it sounds maddening. Wow.
Mhm.
Well, we're coming up on our time here, Clark. But I'd like to, for folks listening, maybe a parent who suspects that they're coming into this kind of a situation. Uh, any sort of top level advice you'd give someone who's thinking like, oh, I think this is where my case is heading.
Well, it's how can I say, you get, I get so many calls, that I can't represent them, because they have no money. I mean, that's the tragic part of this whole area, is that there's a population out there that is their needs are just going completely unmet. And we have all these, nonprofits helping, every other group in the world, but not the spouses of borderlines. I mean, they're just invisible if you in society. People don't recognize them as a tormented, deserving, category or class of litigants. So that's the hardest thing.
Mm,
Um, when I talk to them, it's usually the same thing. I mean, they somehow or another they've realized that they are dealing with a borderline. That light has gone on for them. They've struggled with the borderline behavior, misbehavior, abuse, torture for years, and then somehow they hear something or read something, and they have their aha moment
mm,
where they realize they now have a label and to put on what has been torturing them for however many years they've been in the relationship. And that's when they realize they start asking questions. And the answers they're looking for are quite similar. I mean, the answers are there any shortcuts to this? The answer is no. The only way through it is through it. Is there any help for borderlines? Can I get my spouse any help? The answer is no. It got imprinted at such an early age that that's really the wet cemented, solidified, and you can't really help these people. All you can do is uh, you know bow down to them, bend the knee, and be a good slave to them, if you will. But is that what you really want? And then the hardest question is, can I save my children?
Yeah.
And
That's
that question, sadly, when I was going through this, I called up a fellow that I've read several of his books, and I love him. His name is Dr. Nathan Schwartz-Salant. He died a number of years ago now. But I asked him that question point blank. I said, what can I do to save my children? And he said nothing. And
treasure.
I didn't want to believe him. I
Yep.
didn't want to believe him. And so I fought for 15 years to resolve my case. And, you know, um, he was mostly right, partly wrong. But for most people who call, unless you have a lot of net worth, 2, 3 million net worth, and you can fight this battle, and the children are quite young, it's hard to avoid that imprint from being put in. So once they're 5, 6, 10, 12 years old, you're working on the margins of helping your children. I mean, you have to really find a good therapist and do other things, but it's a tough battle. So that, unfortunately, is it for most people. Then there are a few people that actually take on as clients, and that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Well, listen, we'll get into more of this. Interesting, tragic, all of that. We're out of time for this episode, Clark, but good to see you, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me. Good seeing you.
That's it for today's episode of Vampire Divorce. To learn more about Clarke Young's work as a family law attorney, consultant, and expert witness in high-conflict custody cases, visit the website clarkeyoung.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Thanks very much. I'm Sean O'Connor.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.